Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, August 21st, 2025, and our friend Martin Armstrong is back with us. Welcome back, Martin.
Oh, always nice to see you.
Let me start, Martin, with what's going on between the United States and Russia and what European is trying to do with the case of Ukraine. In your opinion, can the West afford losing Russia as their enemy? Is that possible, even having Donald Trump and his administration in Washington?
Um, Look, as you know, I've met many heads of state, have been dealing with governments for 40 years. Donald Trump is different, and this is what I've concluded um, that a politician has no problem sending somebody into war because I think they are taught basically you don't think about the people that die on the battlefield. That's just collateral damage. We have to win. Trump not being a politician. When I did go to dinner um, at Mar-a-Lago back in March of 2020, when he was president the first time, that's when he actually did impress me. He said he wanted to take the troops out of Afghanistan, but it was the reason. He said he didn't want to send letters to their parents to say your son died for God and country. He says, "What are we doing there?" So I that kind of forced me to really look at politicians a little bit closer, and that's the conclusion that I came up with. That a career politician never thinks about the people that die. We just have to win. And I think they're just taught you don't think about that. It's um, it's collateral damage. It's the same kind of thing in trading. Okay, I mean, okay, I won, I pushed it up. Okay, well, you actually made somebody else lose. You don't think about that. You just think about what you won. you know, so it I guess it's something similar to that. Um, so these neocons, and they are in control of NATO and all of Europe. Um, the first rule that they say is never speak to the enemy because then you might have peace. So that's why you had all these European leaders very aggravated that Trump even had the audacity to call Putin. Um, and I spoke to three countries over there, and I said, has anybody picked up the phone to ever call Putin? Just give me a name. And not a single one did. I said, so how can you say there's no peace if you don't even try? And I think they are just indoctrinated the same way as all the rest of the neocons. They don't want peace. I wouldn't be tremendously optimistic about peace here because I believe that Europe will do its best to sabotage it. Um, the same thing with Zelensky. Um, I had information, I passed it on, and now I think it's all over the place. That he had been wiring $50 million a month, preparing that he might end up losing. Been sending it off to his secret accounts in UAE, and now that's all over the place. Um, and I think that look, Zelensky is deeply hated in Ukraine. Um, and most of what you see in the press or whatever is just outright lies and propaganda. I mean, we had two employees in Ukraine, one in Donetsk and one in Kiev, so both sides. And initially, you had, you know, Putin, Russia sent, it had a whole column of tanks right outside of Kiev. I was concerned, we had an employee there. I said, gee, are you all right? What's going on? And she said, they're not doing anything. It's just a show of force. He could have taken Kiev right then and there if he wanted. He did not. That's not the objective here. Despite all the propaganda that they constantly put out. Zelensky, look, his backer was the same oligarch that did, put in, Burmese, Baruza, and it was, Hunter Biden's, you know, the energy company they put in Hunter Biden. It's the same guy that put Zelensky in. All right, it's the corruption is just off the charts over there. It always has been. And Zelensky has suspended all elections because he knows he would lose. His polls that I get from Ukraine are at best 25%. And you can't blame him. I mean, he's kidnapped people, sent them to the front lines. Initially, when this started in January, I think it was January 4th, I said 100,000 Ukrainians had already been killed. And I got all the hate mail. Oh, that's Russian propaganda, blah, blah, blah. I said, really? Yeah, I'm sorry, this comes from Ukraine, not from Russia. And then Ursula stood up and made a speech. And I put it on my blog. She came out and said 100,000 Ukrainians have been killed. Zelensky said that was basically national security information, and she had to take it out. So I've got videos of both that I put on. All right, so she took out the number. That number from my same sources, which have always been reliable, has exceeded 1.8 million now. Dead. That doesn't count wounded. All right. You had 5 million Ukrainians left and fled to Russia. You had 8 million fled to Europe. I mean, you're talking about, more than 10% of the people that are there are dead. For what? This is, what are they fighting for? When I talk to Ukrainians, they no longer know. The Donbass is basically primarily Russians to begin with. And most people don't realize, but Khrushchev was born there on the border. His successor, Brezhnev, was born in the Donbass. Stalin was from Georgia. So one of the debates in Moscow is who's really Russian. It's look, these things are complicated. It's a mess, and I know a number of these neocons. I've even been to dinner with them, and it's hard to get your head around them. I mean, you had videos of Lindsey Graham actually saying, this is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. I mean, if you said that about blacks or Islam or whatever, it's a hate crime. How can you say that just simply about the Russian people? Why? What is driving this? And all I can assume here is that these people grew up hating Russians, during the Khrushchev days, communist or whatever. And communism fell all by itself, and they're just pissed off that they didn't get to shoot anybody. I don't know. There is no logical explanation to this. The same thing with, throughout all the leaders in Europe. You have Kalis, who's headed like their national security. Um, she should be dragged out of there in chains. I mean, she actually publicly said Russia's too big and needs to be broken up. What if Putin said that about Europe or the United States? Oh, that would be outrageous. But it's okay for her to say it against the other way. Um, look, she's just, another one of these neocons that are can't get over the fact that communism fell. You know, the Russian people don't want to go back to it, no more than the Chinese, want to go back. Eastern Europeans that I know don't want to go back to communism. Maybe you'll find the exceptions. There's somebody that's 75 to 85 that doesn't want to have to make decisions themselves and want to be just taken care of. But the youth, no, nobody wants it. The main difference with communism, and I went to both sides. I mean, I went behind the Berlin Wall and I've been to China. I would say that the difference between the two versions was that Stalin was paranoid. So he taught children, if your parent ever said anything against the state, report them because the state's really your parent. So he was concerned what you would say to your wife. All right. Whereas in China, it was more the tall poppy syndrome. We don't care what you say to your wife, but if you stick your head up and tell everybody else, it's going to get cut off. Right. It was called the tall poppy syndrome. So that's the difference between the two. And I think that's why you've seen China boom very rapidly after communism fell compared to Russia. Because Russia was more involved in trying to alter human nature. Whereas China said, we don't care what you think about, but just don't stick your head up. So, you had communism in Russia was following more of Marx, anti-religion, all this kind of stuff. There's no God, where that didn't necessarily, permeate in China. So I think that, one was very draconian, the other one was just about control, but, not down to, what you said in your house. I had a friend that I knew grew up in East Germany. And when the wall fell, his father went and got his Stasi file. And he came back and his father thought his father was something was wrong. He's punching holes in the wall and stuff like this. What the heck? What's wrong with you? And he's pulling out microphones. After he got a Stasi file, he found that everybody he thought was a friend was ratting on him. And he said after that, he would never speak to anybody but family. So, I mean, that's the real difference. It was like, what are you saying? What are you thinking? And so I think that's what has prevented Russia from really booming like it should have, like China did. But I mean, that's just, it's my observation, going back and forth between the two. But, Eastern Europe is just so indoctrinated with this hatred. You can look up, I mean, the former chancellor of Germany in 1888, Bismarck, had actually come out and said that Europe's going to be engulfed in a major war and it's going to come from the Balkans. And anybody that's had any contact with that region, it was once conquered by the Ottoman Empire. So you have three religions. You have Islam, you have Christian Orthodox, you have Western Christianity. Everybody hates each other. Differences are huge. You go to Serbia and they still hate Armenians. And I mean, even and I've said before, we gave a handful of jets to Greece and made the front pages. They said, "Oh, now we can do a sneak attack on Turkey, the two NATO countries." But it's that's a dispute between Greece and Turks that go back to Alexander the Great. It's hard to. I think to some degree, maybe the language um, perpetuates these ethnic differences. Um, I mean, then you have also religion that gets involved too. I mean, that's kind of like Iran versus Israel. It's my God against your God. It's they're not things that are negotiable. Or I'll give you this plot of land, you give me that. When you're talking about religion, that doesn't quite work. So the Balkans has always been just a mess, and I don't see that changing. I mean, as you know, when they were forming the euro, they came to me, and I remember a discussion I had, and I said, you don't really understand what made America great. And I said, what? I said, it was discrimination. And they were like, oh, how could you say that? That's because it was fair. Whoever was last off the boat was discriminated against until they spoke English in order to get a job. Once that took place, then you ask an American, what are they? They go, oh, I'm half Irish, half Italian, whatever. Everybody intermarried. You don't see that in Europe. You don't see somebody from Scotland going down and marrying somebody from Sicily. I'm sure there's one or two, but it's not common because you don't have that commonality of a language. I mean, I had a French friend, and he was upset that his daughter was actually dating a German. It was like, you do know what they did to us, I mean, these old, resentments or whatever. I mean, they're still there. So, I wouldn't be so optimistic that you're going to see this wonderful land of peace emerge from this. I wish Trump all the luck, but Europe is economically destitute. Their economic growth is a fraction of the United States. They are more or less, they're still very Marxist in the sense that they didn't go as far as Russia did, but they are highly in that direction. Everything's got to be controlled. You can't pay cash for more than €1,000 or for a hotel or something. Where'd you get it? They cancel the currencies routinely to force you to come back with, where'd you get this money so we can get taxes on it. Spain just passed a law that you can't take out more than €3,000 out of an account without government permission. It's very draconian. When they did the COVID lockdowns, then you had the climate change nonsense, and then they put the sanctions on Russia. All right. Complete stupidity. I mean, Europe has nothing. Okay. It has no energy other than Britain. All right. You have to import it. Okay. So you cut off put sanctions on Russia. Very nice. Okay. And now you're paying, 2 to 3 times more for energy. The German economy, which is 25% of Europe, is shrinking. It's so it's kind of like saying, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot to show you how serious I am. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to shoot you in the foot. Whatever they could do, they have done in spades. I actually had a meeting in Berlin, and then I had a meeting in the afternoon in Rome. There were no direct flights, nothing. They cut everything off because of climate change. I ended up having, for the first time in my life, I had to end up hiring a private jet to get from one meeting to the other. It was just like, and these are two capitals. We're not talking about, minor things. Yeah. Um, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like the only direct flight was like 6 o'clock in the morning or something, or 8 o'clock or whatever. It's like, that was it. I mean, so, they're so concerned about, climate and this, that, they've stifled their economy. And, the European economy is basically shrinking. So they need war. The German economy shrunk by 3%. And then you have NATO. Oh, we want 5% military spending. You got to give us now. Hello, do you understand math? -3, and then you want a 5 on top of that. That's depression level. All right. So I wouldn't expect, any real boom time coming out of Europe. I think you're looking at a very, very sharp decline into 2028, and I don't think these people are smart enough to even figure out what they've done.
Martin, when you look at the meeting between Donald Trump and Europeans together with Zelensky, in your opinion, what was that sort of desperation? They joined and came to
Mhm.
the United States to talk with Trump. What was the fear on their part? What was their main concern, in your opinion?
Peace. Um, Look, they need war. What you do psychologically, and there's a book I would recommend. It's called Obedience to Authority. It's done by Stanley Milgram, and this is well known. All right. When you have when you have an economic problem, you need a psychological enemy. All right. So you demonize your opponent. They did that to Saddam Hussein. Oh, he's evil. He's dictator. He's this. He's that. All right. You have to demonize somebody. They're doing that to Putin. All right. They tried that with Trump. All right. The fact that all those leaders hopped on a plane and went to Washington, and they secretly met with Zelensky in the Ukrainian embassy before seeing Trump. All right. This was the same strategy. When Zelensky met with Trump the first time, and it turned into this big fight. Why? I had information from my Ukrainian sources, which have always been correct. All right. That Boris Johnson had hopped on a plane and he was in Kiev 3 days before. That was just supposed to be a signing in Kiev. And he told Zelensky, no, you insist upon going to the White House and embarrass Trump. They thought they could embarrass Trump, make him look weak, so they kept the money going in the war. I passed that information on. That's why the first one was, what the hell's going on here? And, you look at the press, oh, he got a warm reception this time compared to the first. They don't know. They're honestly, as we say in the state, they don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. They don't know what they're talking about. It's all propaganda on the news anymore. That was the difference. All right, and I pass that information on. It's and I do think that Rubio or one of them, you could probably Google it, came out afterwards and said the meeting was supposed to be in Kiev. I think he may put out some sort of explanation, and that Zelensky insisted upon coming there, and it was all basically the same thing. Why these leaders went there? You know, these leaders have all the world leaders like that do not get together except for a G20 meeting. The fact that they all went there shows you how desperate this is. All right, they weren't invited. They all got together, including NATO went. All right, the neocon, retirement home. NATO went as well. They don't want peace. NATO has no purpose, and it should have been disbanded. When communism fell and the Warsaw Pact fell, that's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be the adversary to the Warsaw Pact. So it has no purpose whatsoever but to create war. I've seen the internal memos, and when all the money was going to climate change, the memos were like, how do we remain relevant? All right, so the propaganda they put out, Putin wants to take Europe. Putin's been there since 1999. All right, not interested in taking Europe. Europe has nothing of any value. If Russia took Europe, went into Paris, what are they going to say? Are you going to pay our pensions now? That's it. There's no energy to get. There's no gold reserves or anything of that nature. There's nothing of value in Europe. All right. When Hitler operated, okay, fine, he killed Jews, etc. But he stole all the art because he liked culture. He didn't bomb Paris because he said he thought it was pretty. All right. That's not where we're at today. All right. He was looking for power to conquer, not to destroy. The Jew issue was largely that Trotsky was Jewish, and they believed that communism was a Jewish conspiracy. That's why Ukraine got involved in it, etc., killing Jews, because they were the ones supposedly, pushing, Bolshevism. So that's really where that came from. But we have to understand that what they've done is they took what Khrushchev did. We will bury you. That was different. That was a philosophical conflict between communism versus capitalism. We're better than you. We should conquer you. It wasn't for money or something like that. It was to this Marxist idea of eliminating God and capitalism, greed. That's not Putin. Sorry. And when he said, most of these neocons say, he wants to resurrect the USSR because he said that was one of the, when Russia collapsed, it was one of the darkest days or something. That's half the statement. He also said, he was talking about the Bolsheviks. And he also said, and you can Google this up, all right, that Lenin was just a Bolshevik and not a statesman. There was even speculation that he was going to remove Lenin's tomb from Moscow. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. It would cause too much of a problem. All right. he's not a communist. And what he was talking about was that the Russian Empire of the Tsars was destroyed by the Bolsheviks. All right. Not to resurrect communism in USSR. Come on. The people wouldn't, you know, he's had over a 70% approval rating, and he wouldn't have had that if he was a communist. They cheered him when Yeltsin appointed him because they knew he wasn't a communist. And to look at the real facts, at the same time, the old communists for USSR had filed a motion for impeachment against Yeltsin. All right. So Yeltsin was getting it from the neocons on one side and the USSR on the other side. So that's why he turned to Putin. And because he wasn't an oligarch and he wasn't a communist. And that's why the people cheered him. They were relieved that we got somebody in the middle. That's pretty much it. And in this nonsense that goes on, that they demonize Putin to pretend like he's Khrushchev or something. Then you had Zelensky trying to assassinate him a couple of months ago. Why? Because Putin is really probably the smartest man at the table. And he really does know where this leads would be World War III, and he does not want to go there. Right? I even have the declassified documents from when Clinton met him. And he says, this guy's really smart. Everybody that's ever met him says the same thing. All right. Zelensky tried to take him out. Why? Because Putin has put down many red lines. You give them long-range missiles to attack us, that's it. NATO does. NATO has crossed every single line. Why? They're desperately trying to get him to attack anything in NATO so they can claim he's the aggressor. All right. In psychology, they call it rally around the flag. All right. You get your enemy to do something. That's what false flags are about, etc. You get your enemy to attack you, and then your people will rise up to defend themselves. But they're not going to rise up to say, let's go get this guy because I think he's bad. No, I'm not interested. All right. It's a standard psychological tactic that governments use. And so Zelensky tried to assassinate him. He knows what I know. You take out Putin, that's going to be really bad. Why? Because you're going to get somebody like Medvedev, who isn't so smart and will respond emotionally. That's what they want. And they cursed. Okay, that's it. I'm pushing the button. That's what they want. They want to provoke Russia into any kind of an attack so they can claim he's the aggressor. And Putin's smart. He understands that psychological tactic. And that's why he's backed off on every single thing. That does present a problem for him politically, internally, because then people then see him as weak. And I'm concerned that NATO keeps this up and they succeed in getting somebody to overthrow him, and then we do have World War III. But he knows where it leads. And like I said, I know people from Germany that met him. I mean, everybody I know that has ended up meeting Putin says the same thing. He's very smart.
Lauren, when you look at the way that Donald Trump has somehow tried to deal with the conflict in Ukraine. It seems to me that there is some sort of lack of communication on the part of the Trump administration with Europeans, or they're not totally honest with them, because they have to tell them that there is some sort of limitation on what we can do in Ukraine. There is nothing left there. How you can fight, how it doesn't matter how many weapons you're going to send to Ukraine. It doesn't matter how, how try to put pressure, how you're trying to put pressure on India and China. Because I don't know if you saw Scott Bessent talking about the situation with India and China, and how during the war in Ukraine they have increased the importation of Russian oil has been increasing during. Here is what he said before going to your comment on that.
The history, though, Becky, and look, China importing it is suboptimal. But if you go back and look pre-22, pre-invasion, 13% of China's oil was already coming from Russia. Now it's 16. So China has a diversified input of their oil. If you go back and look now, I believe India had less than 1% of their oil, 1%, and now I believe it's up to 42. So
wow.
India is just profiteering, or they are just profiteering. They are reselling. They've made 16.
So how you can imagine that the United States could go against India and China at the same time?
Look.
And why is that so difficult, Martin? My main question, the other question, because I know that you're going to describe all the details that it's in your mind, but how do you see the communication happening between the Trump administration and Europeans? It doesn't seem that they show any sort of leverage on Europeans. We saw a big show in Washington, in White House, but what is the outcome of that?
I have had conversations with people in Capitol Hill, and I thought maybe they might thought I was, just saying a conspiracy theory. But I said, look, in my opinion, we got to get out of NATO. Europe is going to stab you in the back, and NATO is going to create a false flag and try and drag us into it. The response was, yes, we know, you're right. The conflict with Europe, Europe has no right to be at any table negotiating whatsoever with Russia. Why? There was the Minsk agreement. And, you had Merkel actually come out and publicly state to the newspapers when they asked her, why didn't you enforce the Minsk agreement? There would be no war with that peace agreement. And she said, we never intended to honor it. We were just buying time for Ukraine to build an army. I have never in my career ever heard a politician admit publicly that you lied in a peace treaty. I mean, I can't find, not in my lifetime, but historically, I cannot find that. Why? I mean, I had discussions, and I believe that they adopted what I was basically saying. Europe has forfeited any right to be at any table. Why should Putin accept anything that they say? Even if they sign it, doesn't matter. I mean, I don't know if Merkel was drinking that day or what the heck the problem was, but I've never in my life ever heard something like that. That's
actually
what
it wasn't Martin. It wasn't just Merkel talking about it. We had Francois Hollande, the president of France. These two people were the guarantors of the Minsk II. And they came out said that was a sham. We were just manipulating the situation. We were preparing Ukraine. Go ahead.
So why would you then negotiate with them? It's then you have Boris Johnson. It made the front pages of basically in of Norwegian press. They actually published it. That he said we're in a proxy war with Russia. So the UK is at war with Russia. He's said that publicly. Why would any of these people have a right to sit at the table? This is why I say all of them, they hopped on a plane, ran over there with NATO, which is nothing more than a neocon, retirement home. That's it. And that's the break in the communications. I've, in conversations, point blank said, look, Europe is going to stab Trump in the back. They're not trustworthy. They have their own agenda. They want war because economically they're collapsing. And Europe has they have totally screwed themselves with the COVID, climate change, and then sanctions. Economically, they're a basket case. All right. This is why they're pushing for CBDCs. They're trying to get them, going up by October. I think probably more like January. They routinely cancel their currencies. All right. This is why the dollar is really the reserve currency. About 70% of the paper dollars are outside the country because you can use them everywhere and people know they're not canceled. Okay. 500 euro notes, done. Switzerland canceled. A British pound note from 20 years ago, gone. Not worth anything. Canada canceled all its high denomination notes. US has never done that. Now, this is why Trump proposed reissuing the $500 note. All right. That also would tend to support the whole issue of the dollar globally, because that's what it's really, I know a lot of, people don't necessarily like the fact that the dollar is a reserve currency. I disagree with what the neocons did in putting sanctions on Russia. Once they did that, it was a red flag. That's what created BRICS. They even threatened China. If you help Russia, we'll do the same to you. Really, you idiot? All right. So China's been dumping, U.S. treasuries. All right. They created BRICS because you turned the dollar into a military weapon. Once you did that, the Biden administration did that. That was it. I have argued, that in Washington. I believe that's why Trump's doing the $500 bill stuff. To try and reverse that to some degree. The negotiations. I think that the real issue is going to be there's about 330 some billion dollars of Russian assets that are frozen. All right, the bulk of that is held by Euroclear, but about 70 to 75 is held by France. The rumor is that France has been so desperate they've been tapping into it themselves. So part of the negotiations for a peace deal would be lifting the sanctions against Russia. Are they going to get their money back? Or will Europe say, no, we need it ourselves? That's why I'm saying don't be so optimistic about pieces on the horizon. And, there's a lot more behind the scenes yet. And Zelensky, look, he is a dictator. If he had elections, he would lose. No question. All right. He is so hated in Ukraine. I've spoken to even, military. And what have I heard? Two important things. One, they were initially told just to go to the border with Russia. When they got there, then they were told to invade Kursk. And who did the order come from? MI6, Britain. All right. Others that I speak to, they say that Zelensky, if he was on fire, they would not urinate on him until he was dead. I don't see him as even retiring in Ukraine. I mean, they will kill him. He's wiring out this money, 50 million per month to his secret accounts in UAE. All right. I've told Washington, look, I don't see any possible peace deal with Ukraine until you get rid of him. Let the Ukrainian people vote themselves. Everybody I talk to, they've had enough. They want peace. Zelensky takes his orders from NATO, not from the Ukrainian people. So there was an attempted assassination on him in May of last year. And so he fired his Ukrainian bodyguards, and his bodyguards are American and British. He doesn't trust his own people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, I don't see Europe as warranting any sort of a table in this negotiation. And I cannot see them surviving. They need war. NATO's instructed everybody to increase to 5%, including Canada. All right. It's just money. For what? So they keep their salaries, they keep their jobs, their pensions, and create war. Oh, Putin wants to invade right now. Yes, hurry up, send us more money. This is the bullshit. But that's what they have to say to keep the money going in their pockets. That's why I say NATO is, first of all, it was all exactly those sorts of agreements that created World War I. You invaded this, you have to do this, you have to do that. That's all Article 5. Although it says voluntary, that's what they're counting on. The last time Article 5 was actually invoked was by the United States for 9/11. So I'm not optimistic about any long-term peace deal. There's too many self-interests that are in the opposite direction.
You talk about removing Zelensky, and you see Zelensky as one of the main obstacles to get any sort of peace in Ukraine. But it's so much important to know who's going to replace him, who's going to be in the line to be.
Oh yeah, it's look. As I said, we had employees there, and I was told from the outset that they did not believe that Zelensky won the election. That they believed it was all rigged. same way as you're seeing in Romania. The fact that his backer was the same guy behind Hunter Biden. I mean, it just all smells, like rotten eggs, really. And then he suspends elections so he never has to do it again. And then you have all these Europeans and him. Oh, Putin's a dictator. Really? He has stood for election twice. You do not. Worse, you hear this coming from the EU. Google it. Ursula is the head of the EU. She has never stood for any election, not even a dog catcher. All right. They are appointed. When they created the euro, they came to me. I knew Klaus Schwab. It was deliberately created to prevent democracy. You get to vote for parliament. Very nice. Look at it. It has no right to make legislation. Nothing. The legislation is made in the back room by unelected people. Ursula, Kalis, all of them, none of them stand for election. None of them. So it was deliberately set up that way so that they can be dictators, and the people are too stupid to really know what's good for them. So we should make the decisions for them. That's it.
Yeah, I think. Do you feel that Donald Trump he's really honest when he says he wants to put an end to the conflict, or he's trying to somehow deal with Europe, get some sort of, because you don't see that much of pressure going on European from the Trump administration. What do they want with it? Do you feel that he's gonna get something positive out of the talks he had with Putin? How optimistic can we be when it comes to Ukraine?
Well, I think he and Putin are on the same page. Not just him, but I mean, look, I've spoken directly with RFK. I know they really are anti-war. I cannot say that about people like Lindsey Graham or any European leader whatsoever. And so I believe what you're looking at is that there is a legitimate desire for peace. But I've warned them. Europe is going to stab them in the back. They do not want peace. The reason they all hopped on the plane to get over there, let's be honest, Ukraine couldn't do anything without U.S. intelligence. Nothing. All right. Trump cuts that off. They're dead. Okay. You have Macron coming out telling Germany, we will provide you with nukes. France has its own nukes that are not part of NATO and says, we will provide the umbrella for Europe. We don't need America. This is what's going on behind the curtain. Macron has offered nukes to put nukes on Germany's fighter jets, etc. They want war, but I've spoken to some people in France that are very much also against Macron. All right, they call him the Petit Napoleon, and it's the same old thing. It's they think, and what I've heard, all right, is they consider Eastern Europeans as expendable. That I've heard the phrase, they're all communists anyhow. Just look at Romania. NATO's building the biggest base in Europe in Romania to attack Russia. So the first election, the people are against it, and then they said, "Oh well, he's under investigation, so he can't really be president." What investigation? Oh, he's pro-Russia. No, he's pro his own people. That the Romanian people. No, okay. Look at Ukraine. They're just pawns. Nobody cares about them. If they really cared about the death toll, they would have honored the Minsk agreement. You had, when there was another, peace deal, Boris Johnson hopped on the plane and made the front page of Pravda in Ukraine. Told him he wasn't allowed to sign a peace deal. That means they really care about the Ukrainian people? Almost 2 million dead. 13 million have fled the country. But you care about Ukraine? You don't give two shits about Ukraine. And the Romanian people see this. All right. I know somebody who went there for the second election. They said Macron flew in to make sure that Europe won. All right. You Romanian people they know they're just pawns. They will be decimated the same as Ukraine. Go kill some Russians. We don't care if there's one Romanian still standing. This attitude that I hear is that they think they can use the Eastern European people to take down Russia and they don't get hurt. All right. The nonsense I heard, Putin would never use a nuke because he knows it will blow back on him. So this is what, Julius Caesar said over 2,000 years ago. People believe what they want to believe. He was right. They want to think that they can take down Russia. Look, Google it. You can find that, that Republican neocon that was on, the January 6th trying to take down Trump. Kinzinger actually came out and said, we can take Russia in 3 days. Really? We couldn't even take Ukraine in 3 days. We couldn't take Iraq in 3 days. All right. So I guess 5 days for China, or it's absurd what these people say. Really is absurd. They're psychopaths. In my opinion, I believe, how can you possibly, come up with this nonsense? And as long as it's somebody else's kid, hey, no problem, not mine. They have everything they say about Russia. Oh, he wants this, he wants to dominate. No, that's what they want. They judge others by themselves. It was the Wolfowitz doctrine that when Russia collapsed in 91, came out and said, we have to prevent any other superpower from rising up against us. It's all documented. It's not conspiracy theory. And he's one of the worst neocons. All they want is war and power. So you take the Biden administration. Why was it ended up being so bad? You had Garland as Attorney General who went after Trump. You had Blinken, Secretary of State, and then you had Victoria Nuland. All three in the same administration claimed their families were all from the Ukraine area, and all three, their families were persecuted by Jews. By by Russians. How could three people from the same region end up in the same administration? I mean, that's one hell of a coincidence. Look, I have a lot of friends from around the world. I've never seen two with the same identical backgrounds. Here we had three. And they all admit it after they hit it. So you had, Garland trying to take down Trump to prevent him from becoming president because he's anti-war. You had Blinken basically championing the sanctions against Russia and all the rest of the stuff, which ended up creating BRICS. And you had Victoria Nuland, who was there in my Dan handing sandwiches out, overthrow your government. And, the leaked phone call that she had picked the interim government. They overthrew the government. She handpicked the government and then instructed them to attack the Donbass. Oh, but it's all Russia. Come on. I mean, unfortunately, the press is so indoctrinated and bought and paid for. They just put out whatever the neocons tell them. And even Fox News, I was shocked. I don't even watch that anymore. It's, they put the chairman of the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, on. Who's that? Institute for Study of War was created it's a neocon operation. It was founded by Victoria Nuland's sister-in-law. Can't you find somebody that's not invested in this nonsense? So unfortunately, that's where we're at. I'm not very optimistic about the peace. These people are so intent on war, they will stab Trump in the back. They even tried to assassinate him. They were denying Trump sniper protection until Pennsylvania. Then all of a sudden, he had a sniper protection. Why? Because the guy shot and then they shoot him in the head. Same as Oswald. And then you can't testify. Make sure you kill him. Who put you up to this? Can't ask those questions. I published on our site, out of the JFK files, there's a memo on a CIA guy who told his family in New Jersey that the CIA took out Kennedy and that he was afraid for his own life. 3 weeks later, he's shot to death. Look, these people will do anything for power. That's simply the way it is. They have no morals, no conscience. We're right. Everybody else is wrong. And, the ends justify the means.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Martin, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
I wish it was a little bit better, but like I said, I'm not that optimistic that we're actually going to see peace long term here. And I believe Europe will just stab Trump in the back.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. There is no reason to believe that we had some sort of hope, but it seems that all fading away from us. And
yeah, it's fading away quickly, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Martin. Great pleasure always. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Goodbye. Bye-bye.